Good day, and welcome back to Ocean County College. This is Professor Steve Baglivo talking to you today about the dark side of emotional intelligence. Remember, we had discussed that emotional intelligence is perhaps the one powerful weapon that all of us have in becoming successful. Well, here we see how the negative side of emotional intelligence was used against us. The title of this presentation, They Used My Words Against Me, How the Nazis Destroyed a Civilization. I was very lucky in my life to be able to travel to Europe, and I was able to travel to Poland, to Auschwitz, a place that I had always been interested in, as both my father and my father-in-law fought in World War II. Today, I just finished reading an article by Adam Grant, a newspaper reporter from England, who writes that the greatest moments in human history were fueled by emotional intelligence. In fact, Martin Luther King used his famous "I Had a Dream" speech and sent an electrifying message. He was able to recognize, understand, and manage the emotions of his audience. Well, Adolf Hitler took all of what was right with emotional intelligence and turned it around. Hitler used emotional intelligence for evil purposes. Social scientists have begun to document this dark side of emotional intelligence. Current research by the University of Cambridge in England shows that when a leader gave an inspiring speech filled with emotion, the audience was less likely to scrutinize the message and remembered less of the content. Basically, what they were saying, if it were a good speaker, they would believe anything that person had to say.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste deines Volkes. Gib du jetzt eine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
So basically, even though we didn't know what he was saying, he certainly was very charismatic. So Adolf Hitler comes to power and builds in a culture of self-respect. The skills that we teach today to be successful were flipped and used to destroy a civilization. Self-respect, self-discipline, understanding your life scripts, having a growth mindset, goal setting, and possessing the skills of emotional intelligence were actually used against the population. But what about that self-respect? It seems that after World War I, Germany was such in bad shapes that they were looking for a leader who would take them to a new generation. And that's where Adolf Hitler steps in. Adolf Hitler believed in a superior race, the Aryan race. This was a race that was non-ethnic, not Jewish, not Italian, not Indian, not black, but basically pretty people. Picture The Sound of Music and the actors and actresses in The Sound of Music. You can see what Adolf Hitler was focusing in on. By the way, that was a great movie and you should watch it. It teaches a good lesson. In my visit to Poland, I was amazed at how many white people of no other national descent lived there. You can see how Hitler could see that a population of what he thought was beautiful people, and how easy it would be to identify outsiders. Photographed is a Polish folk group. They're not in Poland, however. Can you tell where they are? Well, if you choose London, you are correct. Note the London Bridge pictured in the background. When we study social studies, we see that maps change depending on political situations. Actually, At the time of the Second World War, there were many countries that were under Soviet control, under the control of the Soviet Union. Here, Estonia and Latvia, Lithuania, and the Ukraine were under control of the Soviet Union. They bordered Poland on one side and Germany bordered it on the other. And that became an interesting concept for Adolf Hitler. As you study social studies, it might be interesting to see what happened to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics that was really dissolved in the late 1990s. In fact, there are students even in our school who live in Georgia, and Georgia's around here, where there is some Soviet aggression, and there is still Soviet aggression in Poland, but that's another story. At the end of World War I, Germany had lost. The Treaty of Versailles took place on June 28, 1919, and that was in France. And that was exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. He was from Austria. Basically, that's what started the war, World War I. He was actually from Sarajevo, and Sarajevo, believe it or not, as the modern Olympics took place in Sarajevo not too long ago. It was 1984 Olympic Games that featured Sarajevo. And in 1984, Sarajevo was mostly Muslim. So you see, we all fit in together in this big world economy. But at the time, the German capital, Berlin, was divided into 4 sectors: the French sector, the British sector, the American sector, and the Soviet sector. German boundaries were reassigned, and Germany was forced to pay reparations. So that's what was going on, and that led to the takeover by Adolf Hitler. So Adolf Hitler comes to power in 1933, again as a result of the loss of national pride that occurred at the end of World War I. He was a powerful speaker, and this led him and gave him the emotional intelligence to take over a nation. Remember, in a previous class session, we had talked about life scripts and how they're written probably uncontrollably. Well, what was happening here was that German children were raised to believe that they were better than everyone else. So this was the life script that was written for the German children. And so the stage is set. The term self-discipline took on a national theme, and that is the way a superior race would act. Adolf Hitler believed that these soldiers would be able to take over the world. Adolf Hitler had a growth mindset. He believed that he would be able to take over the world domination. The forces that worked with Adolf Hitler were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the other side, the Allied forces, were Britain, France, Austria, Canada, New Zealand, India, the Soviet Union, China, and of course the USA. Now his plan was to take over the world. He even planned on coming to the United States to take over the United States. In fact, during the war, during the Second World War, submarines were noted outside of the Jersey coast. And Japan had captured several islands in North America, near Alaska. During the war, Hitler took over or invaded many of the Eastern and Western European countries. These included Czechoslovakia and Austria, Denmark and Norway, Belgium, even France, and he had attacked Russia and Britain. Pictured here is the influence on Germany over Eastern Europe. And, believe it or not, at the same time, Germany had taken over Western Europe and France. Now, one might find it hard to understand how Germany could take over so many countries in a short amount of time. But remember, in Europe, the countries are very close together. Here's Germany, Berlin, and here is Warsaw, Poland. You can see that the other countries are relatively close as well, almost like states in the United States. In fact, what was the distance? The distance from Berlin, Germany to Warsaw, Poland? Well, it's the same as the distance from New York to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So you can understand how it was relatively easy for Hitler to take over Warsaw. Hitler also invaded Britain, England, the United Kingdom. And there you can see the distance. The waterway was one of the reasons why it was difficult for Germany to get into England. However, the distance was not that great. The distance from Berlin, Germany to London, England is the same as the distance from New York to Ohio. And that's less than 600 miles. So you can see that was definitely a possibility. Hitler started his plan of world domination by first occupying Czechoslovakia. Then the Germans walked into Austria, and then they invaded Poland. Hitler really hated Warsaw, and during the war he actually destroyed every building or damaged every building in Warsaw. You can see in the background the Holy Cross Church. That was damaged during the war, but did remain standing. Interesting place, the Holy Cross Church. It is where a famous Polish composer, his heart is buried in the church. His name was Chopin, Frederick Chopin, and his heart was buried in the church. And believe it or not, the heart is still there and the church remains standing today. But Hitler had it out for Poland. After taking all of the Polish Jews and putting them into concentration camps, the other people in Warsaw really stayed very quiet and didn't take either side. They didn't support Hitler. So he was very angry about this, and what he did was he actually destroyed every building. Many of the concentration camps and most of the death camps were located in Poland. Here is a picture of Auschwitz, Auschwitz I. The buildings actually are relatively nice and relatively well built. That's because this Auschwitz was once a Polish military camp. Before the war, it was a military camp that eventually was taken over by the Germans. When they took over the military camp, what they did was they built a barbed wire fence. Not just one barbed wire fence, but two barbed wire fences around the entire camp. The fences were also electrified, so it was very difficult for anyone to escape from Auschwitz once they were brought here. This is an archival photo of the first transport of 728 Polish prisoners to Auschwitz, and that happened in June of 1940. On the dock side, how can a person or a small amount of soldiers control the masses of people? Well, they did that by using the skills of relationship management, one of the parts of emotional intelligence. Even negative ones, you see, can be used to influence people and gain them under control. Here, Hitler and his forces used fear to control even large groups of people. I do like photography, and in my visit to Auschwitz, I had wanted to take a picture of the entrance to the Auschwitz camp. It was a very famous entrance, but we were moving relatively quickly, and I didn't really get a good picture of the entrance. Here is an archival picture of the entrance with the German words on top saying, "Work sets you free." So as people enter the camp, they felt as though they would be released if they worked hard and they listened to what they were told. Here is one of my photos from the opposite direction. Note the guard tower at the entrance to the camp. This is the end of part 1.